She left him at the altar to protect him. 2 years later, she's bleeding in an emergency room. And he's the one who walks through the door. Sebastian Hawthorne built an empire on fear and silence. Claire Whitmore destroyed their future to keep him alive. But the man who sent her away is still out there, and he's finished waiting. Tonight, the lies Claire buried 2 years ago come crawling back. And this time, they've got teeth. If you've ever loved someone enough to disappear for them, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came in sideways off the Hudson, the kind of rain that didn't fall so much as a tack, driving hard against glass and concrete, turning every lit window in Manhattan into a smear of orange and white. It was 11:47 at night when the cab lurched to a stop outside the emergency entrance of Mercy General, and the door swung open before the driver had the vehicle fully in park. Claire Whitmore stepped out into the storm. She moved wrong. Anyone watching could see it, the way she held her left arm pinned against her body, the way every step came with a fractional hesitation, a split second of internal calculation before her foot hit the wet pavement, like her nervous system was running triage on itself. Her coat was dark, charcoal wool, expensive, the kind of thing that didn't belong in a neighborhood emergency room at midnight. But it was soaked through, and the sleeve on the left side hung wrong. The fabric bunched and pulled in a way that cloth didn't naturally bunch. She paid the driver with her right hand, didn't wait for change, didn't look back. The automatic doors parted and she walked into the fluorescent glare of the ER waiting room, and the smell hit her first. Antiseptic and old coffee and the particular stale desperation of a place where people came when they'd run out of other options. A toddler was crying somewhere behind a row of plastic chairs. A man in his 60s sat with a dish towel wrapped around his hand, staring at the floor. A television mounted in the corner above a dead plant was cycling through a weather alert, the meteorologist's mouth moving silently behind whatever sporting event someone had muted over it. Claire walked to the intake desk and gave the woman behind it the same look she'd been giving intake nurses for the past 4 years. Steady, tired, slightly ashamed in a way that felt rehearsed. "I fell," she said. "Down the stairs. I think something's broken." The nurse, heavy-set, mid-40s, the particular practiced neutrality of someone who had stopped believing the stairs story sometime around year 3 of her career, typed something without looking up. "Which arm?" "Left." "Can you move the fingers?" Claire moved them. The pain that traveled up from her wrist to her shoulder was the kind that turned the edges of vision white, and she breathed through it with her jaw set and her eyes forward. And the nurse wrote something else down and handed her a clipboard. "Fill out what you can. Someone will call you in about 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Claire took the clipboard to a chair near the wall, the one farthest from the television and the crying child, and sat with her back to the corner the way she always sat in public spaces now. She filled out the form with her right hand. Name, Claire Whitmore. Date of birth, March 4th, 1997. Reason for visit, fall injury, left arm. Emergency contact, she left it blank. She had left it blank every time for 2 years. She was 3 lines from the bottom of the form when the automatic doors opened again, and cold air rushed in from outside, and something changed in the room. She didn't look up. She had trained herself not to look up at every new arrival, because looking up was a habit that got people noticed, and getting noticed was the one thing she couldn't afford. She kept writing. Insurance provider, policy number. But there was something different about the quality of the silence that came in with the cold air. The way the other people in the waiting room shifted almost imperceptibly. The way the intake nurse straightened slightly in her chair. The way even the toddler's crying dropped half a register without stopping entirely. Claire had been in enough rooms with enough powerful men to know what that particular atmospheric change meant, and even before she finished the thought, she was already making the calculation about the exits. The double doors to her left marked authorized personnel only, the main entrance behind her, the hallway that probably led to a back stairwell if she could reach it before. Claire. 1 word. 2 syllables. The voice was low and even, not loud, not performing, and it hit her somewhere just below the sternum the way it always had, with a kind of physical precision that she'd never found an adequate description for in 2 years of trying not to think about it. She finished writing the policy number. Then she set the pen down on the clipboard and looked up. Sebastian Hawthorne was standing 10 feet away. He was wearing a dark suit, not the jacket he'd arrived in, which was probably still in whatever vehicle he'd come in, because the jacket would have shown the rain, and his shirt was damp at the collar and at the shoulders, and his dark hair was wet at the temples. He was 34 years old, and he looked exactly like he had looked 2 years ago, which was unfair in a way that made her chest tighten with something she couldn't afford to name right now. He was tall. He had always been the kind of still that other people arranged themselves around, the kind of presence that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. 2 men had come in behind him and had stopped near the entrance, and they were wearing the kind of stillness that had a specific professional origin, the stillness of men who were paid to watch rooms. His eyes hadn't moved from her face. "Sebastian." Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. "Whatever you're doing here, you need to leave." He crossed the distance between them in 4 steps. He didn't rush. He sat down in the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her, and when he looked at her arm, at the way she was holding it, something happened in his face that wasn't quite emotion, or was emotion processed and controlled so fast that it came out looking like decision. "How bad?" he said. "I'm fine, I'm being seen." "How bad, Claire?" She looked at him for a moment and then looked at the clipboard in her lap. "The radius is probably fractured. Maybe the ulna. It's manageable." "Who did this?" "I fell." The silence that followed that statement had texture to it. Sebastian looked at the form in her lap. He looked at the blank space where an emergency contact should have been. He looked at her face, at the way her jaw was set, and then he looked at the door she'd been calculating distances to when he walked in, and something resolved behind his eyes that she recognized and had been afraid of for exactly 2 years. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, "and then I'm going to make some calls, and it won't matter whether you tell me or not. Don't. Who did this to you?" Claire closed her eyes. Outside, the rain was still working at the windows. The toddler had stopped crying. The television cycled its silent weather alert. She had spent 2 years making every calculation correctly, every single one, until tonight, until the 45 minutes when everything she'd built started coming apart at the seams, and now she was sitting in a plastic chair in a fluorescent emergency room with her arm broken in at least 2 places. And the one person she had most needed to never see again was sitting close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite the rain cold soaked into his clothes. "Ethan Caldwell," she said. She kept her voice very quiet. Something moved across Sebastian's face. Recognition, followed immediately by something colder. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "No," she said sharply, putting her right hand on his wrist. "Sebastian, listen to me. If you call your people right now, everything falls apart. The evidence, there's a timeline, there's a sequence of events that has to... You've been inside Caldwell's organization." It wasn't a question. His voice was still low, still even, and that scared her more than shouting would have. The stillness of a man who is rapidly restructuring his understanding of the last 2 years. "Not now," she said. "Not here." He looked at her hand on his wrist. She took it away. "My car is outside," he said. "I'm waiting to be seen." He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to the intake desk. Claire watched him say something to the nurse. She couldn't hear it, but she saw the nurse's expression go from practiced neutrality to a slightly different expression, and then the nurse picked up her phone. 2 minutes later, a physician's assistant appeared from behind the authorized personnel-only doors, and Sebastian came back to Claire's chair. "They'll see you now," he said. "You can't just... The physician on call is very good. He makes house calls." He said it without inflection. He reached down and picked up the clipboard from her lap and set it on the chair beside her. "You can fill this out later or not at all. It doesn't matter." She looked up at him. "Sebastian, I need you to understand that this is not something you can walk into and fix in an evening. I have been inside Caldwell's operation for 2 years. There are pieces in place. If you go at him wrong, it destroys everything I've built." "Then you'll explain it to me," he said, "while someone looks at your arm." She held his gaze for a long moment. He held hers back. He had always been able to do that, stay in eye contact until the other person looked away. And it wasn't aggression, it was just patience weaponized, and she had forgotten how much it had always unnerved her. She got to her feet. In the small examination room, under lights that were whiter and more unforgiving than the waiting room, the physician's assistant, a lean, quiet man who asked no questions about the circumstances, worked through the assessment with efficient hands. Sebastian stood in the corner of the room and watched, and the two men who'd come in with him were somewhere outside the door. And Claire sat on the paper-covered examination table and tried to think through the sequence of what had happened tonight and what it meant. What it meant was that she was out of time. The sequence she'd spent 2 years carefully constructing had a margin of error, and she had been inside that margin for the last 6 weeks, pushing her luck because she was close, genuinely close. And then tonight, Ethan Caldwell had stopped being the oblivious executive she'd spent 2 years making him believe she was indispensable to, and had started being something else entirely. The PA was asking her to describe the pain on a scale of 1 to 10. She said 6, which was a lie. The PA wrote down 8 and said he'd have imaging ordered. When he stepped out to arrange it, Sebastian moved from the corner of the room to the foot of the examination table, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You look the same," he said finally. "That's not a compliment or a criticism. It's just 2 years, and you look the same." "I'm not the same." "No." He said it slowly. "I don't imagine you are." She looked at her left hand, which was resting in her lap, palm up, the fingers slightly swollen at the knuckles. The PA had cut the sleeve of her coat, getting it off her arm, and the bruising had already spread from mid-forearm to just above the elbow, a landscape of dark purple and deep red that mapped the geography of exactly how hard someone had needed to work to do this much damage. "I need you to not ask me anything more tonight," she said. "Not about the 2 years, not about Caldwell, just let me get through tonight and I'll explain everything." "I've been waiting 2 years for an explanation, Claire." "I know. You left a note. You left a note that said you were sorry, and you left it on a hotel bed the morning of our wedding, and I didn't hear your voice again until 10 minutes ago." She didn't say anything. "So if you're asking me to wait until morning," he said, and his voice was doing that thing again, that measured, controlled thing that was worse than anger, "I need you to give me something to work with. One thing. Something I can hold on to for the next 6 hours while someone puts your arm back together." Claire looked at the wall, at a poster about hand-washing protocols, at the biohazard bin in the corner, at all the ordinary furniture of a place that dealt with damage on a production line basis. "Richard told me that your enemies were going to use me against you," she said. "That the only way to keep you safe was to disappear. That if I stayed, you'd spend everything you had protecting me instead of protecting yourself, and they'd take the empire apart while you were distracted." She paused. "I believed him. I believed him because the way he explained it made a terrible kind of sense, and because I knew that you would spend everything protecting me, and I couldn't let that happen." The room was very quiet. "Richard Ashcroft," Sebastian said. "Yes." She heard the breath he drew in. She didn't look at him. "He told you to leave," Sebastian said, and his voice had changed, gone somewhere lower and more careful. The voice of a man running a calculation that was producing unexpected results. "He told me it was the only way to save you. He gave me contacts, a framework for building a new identity. He had everything already prepared." She finally looked at Sebastian. "I thought he was acting out of loyalty to your father. It never occurred to me that he had a different agenda. I found out 8 months ago. I found out by accident, going through Caldwell's financial records from the inside. There was a payment structure, so a series of transfers that I couldn't explain, running through a shell company I didn't recognize, and when I traced it back..." She stopped. "I found Richard's fingerprints all over Caldwell's operation, not just on the edges, at the center of it." Sebastian had gone very still. The particular stillness of a man who was looking at a picture he'd been trying to assemble for a long time, and watching the last pieces drop into place in a way that changed what the picture was entirely. "He sent you away," Sebastian said quietly. "And while you were gone, while I was gone, Caldwell's people and your enemies had 2 years to work with. 2 years without anyone on the inside asking the right questions." She held his gaze. "I couldn't come back until I had something concrete enough to finish it. Otherwise, what I'd done, leaving the 2 years, it would have been for nothing." He looked at her for a long time. She watched him process it, watched the emotion get handled and stored somewhere internal where he'd deal with it later, the way he had always dealt with things that hit too close to the center of him. And what remained on the surface was the man who ran the empire, the calculation engine, the strategist. "The ledger," he said. Her chin lifted slightly. I've been building it for a year. Financial records, transfer documentation, communications. It's everything, Sebastian. It's the entire operation, mapped and documented. Where? She glanced down at the coat that was folded on the chair beside the examination table, the ruined left sleeve hanging open. Inside the lining, there's a flash drive. Something that might have been, in another man, relief passed across Sebastian Hawthorne's face. He reached over and picked up the coat, found the seam she'd sewn and re-sewn so many times it had become second nature, felt the slim, hard rectangle inside it. Ethan found out, she said, tonight. Someone, I don't know who, tipped him off that I'd been copying records. He came to my apartment with two men and he... She stopped, looked at her arm again. He wanted the drive. I'd already pulled it from the office. I got out, but barely. Sebastian set the coat back down. He said nothing for a moment. You almost died tonight, he said, for something you've been building for 2 years, to fix something that was done to both of us by a man we both trusted. I know. And you were going to, what? You were going to finish it and then go back to disappearing. The question sat there between them. She didn't answer it, which was its own answer, and Sebastian looked at the floor and then at the coat with the flash drive hidden inside it and then at the door. My team will be here in 40 minutes, he said. You're not going back to wherever you've been living. I need you where I can make sure. I need you where my people can keep eyes on you while we work through what's on that drive. Sebastian, this is not a negotiation, he said quietly. You can argue with me about everything else later. Tonight you get in my car. The PA came back with forms for imaging. Claire answered the questions he asked her. Sebastian returned to his corner and took out his phone and typed something, and outside in the hallway, one of his men made a call. The machinery of a powerful man's protection detail began to move with quiet, practiced efficiency around her, the way it had moved around her 2 years ago, the way she had given up and run from 2 years ago. And she sat on the paper-covered table with her broken arm and her salvaged flash drive and tried to calculate whether any of this could still end the way she'd planned. The imaging confirmed a displaced fracture of the radial shaft and a hairline fracture of the ulna. The physician's assistant, who had stopped behaving as though this were anything like a routine ER visit, approximately 4 minutes after Sebastian had spoken to the intake nurse, arranged for a portable splint and a referral to an orthopedic specialist, and then disappeared with a quiet efficiency that suggested he understood the nature of the men in the hallway outside. Sebastian didn't speak again until they were in the elevator, going down to the parking structure. He stood beside her, and she was aware of the inch of space between his arm and hers, and the way neither of them moved to close it or widen it. The men with Caldwell tonight, he said. You'd seen them before. 2 of them, yes. They come in from outside. He brings them in for things he doesn't want connected back to him. It means he already knew or suspected. He's been prepared for this. For how long? At least a month, maybe 6 weeks. Sebastian nodded slowly. Then we have less time than you think. I know. Someone tipped him off about you. That means someone in my organization, or someone with access to my organization's information, is still feeding Caldwell's people. She had known this, had known it for 3 weeks, had not known how to use the knowledge without revealing herself prematurely. Yes. Is it Richard? I don't know. Maybe. Or someone Richard turned. The transfers on the drive should make that clear once we have someone qualified to read them. He glanced at her. I have people for that. I know you do. The elevator opened onto the parking structure. It was cold and damp, exhaust and oil, and the particular echo of enclosed concrete, and Sebastian's car was waiting 20 feet away, a black SUV with the engine running and a driver who climbed out when he saw them and opened the rear door without being asked. One of the security men was already inside. The other fell into step behind them. Claire stopped at the edge of the elevator, her right hand holding the coat against her chest, the flash drive pressed against her palm through the fabric. Sebastian. He stopped, looked at her. What I told you in there, what Richard did, what I thought I was doing. I need you to know that I understood I was asking you to pay a price I had no right to set. I know that. She kept her eyes on his. I'm not asking you to forgive it right now. I needed you to know that I know. He looked at her for a moment that stretched out in the concrete echo of the parking structure, rain audible somewhere above them through the ventilation, and then he said, Get in the car, Claire. She got in the car. The city moved past the tinted windows in wet streaks of light, and Sebastian sat across from her in the rear compartment with the coat in his hands, feeling the drive through the lining, and did not speak. And she watched the city and tried not to think about what was waiting at the other end of the ride. The penthouse. The place she had not been in 2 years. The place where she had been, for one brief window, something close to safe. His phone buzzed. He looked at it and something changed in his expression. Subtle, controlled. But she had learned to read subtle in the years she'd been doing this. "What?" she said. He put the phone away. Ethan Caldwell's office building had a fire in the server room approximately 20 minutes ago. She felt the cold drop through her chest. The backup records. Whatever. He couldn't delete by hand. Yes. Sebastian looked at the coat in his hands. Which means that drive you've been carrying in your coat lining is the only complete copy of the evidence in existence. He looked up at her. And Caldwell knows you have it. She stared at him. Which means, Sebastian said, that tonight isn't finished, not even close. Outside, the rain kept falling, and the city kept moving, and somewhere in the dark and wet of Manhattan, Ethan Caldwell was making the same calculation she was, except he was doing it from a position of better information, and he had not just broken his arm, and he had not just spent 2 years being careful, only to have everything accelerate past the point of her control in a single evening. The SUV turned north, heading toward Midtown, and Claire held the coat against her chest and felt the small, hard shape of the drive inside it, and thought about Richard Ashcroft, and about the payments she'd traced 8 months ago, and about the one piece of the operation she still hadn't been able to map, the piece that lived somewhere close to Sebastian himself, close enough to have fed Caldwell the tip that burned everything to the surface tonight. She had built the ledger to end an empire. She had not quite finished accounting for the man who might be living inside Sebastian's own walls. By the time the SU-5 reached the underground entrance of Sebastian's building, she was no longer sure which of them was the most exposed. And she was beginning to understand that the 2 years of careful construction she'd done might have been, from the very beginning, exactly what someone wanted her to believe she was building, pointed exactly where they wanted it pointed, and that the real trap had not yet fully opened. The elevator doors parted onto the penthouse floor, and Sebastian stepped out first, and the city lay below them through 60 feet of reinforced glass, every light a smear in the rain, and Claire walked out behind him and felt the particular quality of a space that remembered her, and thought, whoever tipped Ethan off about me tonight already knows where I am right now. She turned to say it to Sebastian. His phone lit up with a call from a number with no name attached, and when he answered it, the voice on the other end said 4 words that made the blood leave Sebastian's face for the first time she had ever witnessed in all the years she had known him. He ended the call. He looked at her. "Richard knows you're here," he said. Sebastian didn't move for 3 full seconds after the call ended. 3 seconds was a long time for a man who processed information the way other men breathed, automatically, without visible effort. And Claire watched those 3 seconds happen and felt her stomach drop through the floor of the penthouse. "How?" she said. It wasn't a question about whether it was true. It was a question about the mechanics, about the breach, about the specific location of the hole she hadn't found yet. He didn't say how. Sebastian was already moving, crossing the open living space toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, not to look out at the city but to pull the automated panels across them. Blackout glass, she realized, watching the city disappear behind it in segments. "He said he knows you're here. He said you have something that belongs to him. That belongs to—" She stopped, breathed. "He's claiming ownership of the ledger. He's claiming a lot of things." Sebastian turned. "He also said that if I hand you over before midnight, what's on that drive stays between the 3 of us." The room was very quiet. "And you?" I hung up. He said it flat, like it didn't require elaboration, like the alternative had never existed as a real option in his mind. He pulled his phone out again and made a call that was answered on the first ring. "I need the building's secondary security protocols active in the next 10 minutes. All of them. And I need Marcus up here now." He ended it without waiting for a response. Claire was still standing near the elevator. She became aware of the coat in her hands, the weight of it, the small, hard rectangle inside the lining, and she set it down carefully on the low table near the entrance because carrying it made her feel like she was advertising. "Tell me about the call," she said. His voice. Was he calling from local? Manhattan? Maybe closer? Sebastian looked at the code on the table. He looked at her. You said you traced Richard's involvement through Caldwell's financial records 8 months ago. Yes. And in 8 months, you didn't find a way to act on it. She heard the edge in it, not accusation, not quite, but the proximity of accusation. I needed the full picture. If I'd moved on Richard without the complete documentation, he'd have had time to cover the transfers, burn the trail. He'd have come after you, and I'd have given you half the weapon you needed to fight back with. So you sat on it. I built the case. For 8 months. He was looking at her the way she had been afraid he would look at her when the full story finally came out. Not with anger, which she could have navigated, but with that flat, exhausted assessment that was worse than anger because it contained judgment without heat. Sebastian, I was inside an operation run by people who would have killed me the moment they suspected I was anything other than what I presented myself as. Every decision I made had a shelf life. I'm not criticizing the tradecraft, he said. I'm telling you that for 8 months you knew Richard Ashcroft was working against me, and you chose not to warn me. The word chose landed between them. I know how that sounds, she said. Does it sound like you made a decision about my safety without consulting me? Because that's what it sounds like. And it sounds like the same decision you made 2 years ago when Richard told you to disappear. He wasn't raising his voice. He had the focused quality of a man who had spent years learning that volume was the refuge of people who couldn't control the room with tone alone. You keep deciding what I can handle, Claire. You keep building the architecture of my protection around me without telling me the building exists. She opened her mouth. Don't. He turned away toward the kitchen, put both hands flat on the counter, and stood there for a moment with his back to her. Don't explain it again. I heard you the first time. I understand why you made each individual decision. What I'm telling you is that the pattern of those decisions is a problem. She closed her mouth. The elevator opened and a man stepped out. Marcus, mid-30s, the kind of physical economy that came from discipline rather than bulk, with a face that did its best work when it was expressionless, which was most of the time. He was one of Sebastian's senior people, the kind of senior that didn't have a formal title because formal titles created documentation. He glanced at Claire with no particular surprise and then looked at Sebastian. Building sealed, Marcus said. Cameras on full relay. Two men on the roof, 2 on parking level B. We've got eyes on every entrance point. Ashcroft called, Sebastian said. He knows she's here. Marcus processed this without any visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. The absence of surprise from a man paid to anticipate threats. That's a communication problem. Yes. Internal. Almost certainly. Marcus looked at Claire again. Anyone know where you were tonight before the hospital? My apartment, East Village. I had a car service to the hospital. I paid cash. Different name. How long have you been using that address? 6 weeks. I move every 2 months. Did anyone from Caldwell's operation have access to... No. The 2 men he brought to my apartment tonight, they found me because Ethan already had my work location, and he had the phone I used for the company. He tracked the phone. She paused. I left the phone at the apartment, smashed. I didn't take it with me. Marcus turned to Sebastian. If she left the phone and they tracked her to the hospital anyway, someone made a call between the apartment and here. Sebastian nodded once. The hospital, Claire said. The intake nurse. Someone could have... I'll run it. Marcus pulled his own phone out. I need to know who else was in that ER between 10:30 and midnight. He stepped away from them, toward the far side of the penthouse, and his voice dropped into that focused murmur of a man running a conversation that wasn't meant to be overheard. Sebastian turned back from the counter. The moment of stillness had passed and he was moving again, pulling his jacket off and dropping it over a chair, rolling his shirt sleeves with the particular efficiency of a man who was shifting modes. The drive, he said. How is it organized? 5 main folders: transfer records, shell company documentation, internal communications, personnel files, and... She stopped. And the 5th folder is the one I finished 3 days ago. Cross-references between Richard's payment structure and the timing of every significant strategic failure in your operation over the last 4 years. She watched his face. Every time a shipment was intercepted, every informant who went dark, every deal that collapsed at the wrong moment. She paused. It wasn't bad luck, Sebastian. It was a schedule. The sound he made wasn't quite a word. It was the sound of a man absorbing something that explained too much, that reached back through years of damage and reattributed it, took things he'd buried and grieved and accepted as the cost of doing business, and turned them into something he couldn't have anticipated and couldn't have prevented, and that was worse, somehow, than if he had simply been outmaneuvered. 4 years, he said. Maybe longer. 4 years is what I can document. He walked to the table where she'd set the coat. He didn't pick it up. He stood over it and looked down at it, and she watched the thing happen in him that she had been afraid would happen. The cold, systematic restructuring of memory, events reordering themselves against a new framework, the cost being tallied. How many people did I lose, he said, that I thought were operational casualties? I don't know exact numbers. The communications records suggest at least. Don't give me a range. His voice had dropped. How many? 7. That I can confirm is targeted. There may be more. The silence had weight to it. Marcus came back across the room. The intake nurse placed a call at 11:52 to a private number. I've got someone tracing it now, but the registration is going to be clean. It'll go through 2 or 3 shells before it hits anything real. 10 minutes? Maybe 15. It doesn't matter, Sebastian said without looking away from the coat. We already know the destination. Richard has people in the building? Claire asked. Richard has people in a lot of places, Marcus said. That's been the operational assumption for the past 3 months. We've been running a containment protocol, information siloing, limited distribution on anything tactical. He glanced at Sebastian. We just didn't know who he was targeting yet. He was building toward a takeover, Claire said. It's in the communications folder on the drive. He has an arrangement with the rival syndicate. Once Sebastian's operation was sufficiently destabilized, Richard was supposed to deliver the remaining assets and the key relationships. In exchange, he'd run the merged operation as a senior partner. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He'd deliver Sebastian, or his absence. Claire looked at Sebastian's back. Richard's preferred outcome was Sebastian leaving the country under enough legal pressure that he'd have no choice. The ledger I was building, the one Ethan's people destroyed the servers of tonight, it was supposed to be delivered anonymously to federal investigators with Sebastian's name in certain documents. Documents I didn't create, that I found in Ethan's files, that Richard put there. She stopped. If everything had gone according to Richard's plan, you'd have been looking at federal charges within the next 60 days. Sebastian turned. His face was a specific kind of controlled that she understood, now that she had spent 2 years studying what control looked like when it was doing maximum work. It was the face of a man who had been betrayed at a depth that ordinary language didn't quite reach, by someone who had been at the table for decades, and who was engaged in the process of replacing grief with something he could use. I want Richard brought in, he said to Marcus. Where is he? Find him. Sebastian said it without inflection. He'll be watching the building. He's too close to stop now. He's been working toward this for 4 years and he's going to see it through. He'll have people positioned. His eyes moved to Claire. He called me when he knew you were here because he wanted to see how I'd respond. Whether I'd hand you over or whether I'd protect you, either way, he gets information. If you hand me over, Claire said slowly, working through it, he gets the drive and whatever he needs to complete the frame on you. And if I protect you, he knows you still have something to lose, that you can still be controlled through me. She looked at Sebastian. He's been playing this since the beginning. He sent me away 2 years ago knowing you'd spend those 2 years with part of your attention somewhere else. Looking for me or trying not to look for me or whatever it was you... She stopped. Both, Sebastian said. Alternately. Sometimes simultaneously. He said it without sentiment, just reporting. It cost me focus at times that I couldn't afford it. Richard knew it would. Marcus was already on his phone again, moving toward the elevator, running coordinates or personnel or both. The machinery of Sebastian's operation working through the breach in its own body, trying to isolate and excise what had been living inside it. Claire sat down on the arm of the low sofa near the table. The pain in her arm had moved from sharp to the deep, grinding register that suggested the nerve block from the splinting procedure was beginning to wear off. She held it close to her body and breathed and tried to think about what came next. The 5th folder, she said. The cross-references. There's a specific entry in the communications records, a message sent 14 months ago from an alias I tracked back to Richard, to a contact in Ethan's organization. It references a contingency. Sebastian looked at her. He called it the clean room scenario, she said. I didn't understand it when I first found it. I thought it was terminology for a financial procedure. But reading it against everything else, she looked up at him. It means if everything else fails, if the legal frame collapses, if the evidence is at risk of being recovered or used against him, he cleans the room. He eliminates every person who has direct knowledge of the operation. The room was quiet. That's you, Sebastian said. That's me, yes, and Ethan, who's now a liability. And anyone else who's seen the interior of this. She paused. And you. He absorbed this without visible response. He called you tonight, she said, and you wouldn't give me up. That tells him the evidence is here and the clean room scenario is active. She looked at her arm, at the dark geography of the bruising visible at the edge of the splint. He's going to come at this building tonight, Sebastian. Not tomorrow, not after he's repositioned. Tonight, while the information from whoever was in that ER is still fresh, and before you've had time to fully shore up the security. Sebastian picked up the coat from the table. He reached into the lining, found the drive, held it between two fingers for a moment. How many complete copies of this exist? He said. That one. That's it. Ethan burned the servers. I never made a duplicate because I was afraid of where I could safely store it. She watched him. I know. If something happens to this drive tonight, everything I spent 2 years building disappears. Richard walks away clean. You're exposed on the federal side with no counter-documentation. She held his gaze. I know. He looked at the drive for another moment, then crossed the room and handed it to her. Keep it on you. Sebastian, keep it on you. My people can replicate the contents as soon as we have a secure enough channel to transmit them, but right now that drive is the only thing that matters. And I want it somewhere I know it won't. He stopped. Won't what? He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read, something that lived in the territory between practical assessment and something that he had not finished deciding whether to let himself feel. Won't be lost, he said. She took the drive, held it in her right hand. Marcus came back from the elevator alcove, and the quality of his stillness had changed. It was tighter now, compressed. The stillness of a man carrying information with a short fuse. We found him, Marcus said. Richard. North tower of the building across the street. 17 floors up, clear sight line to the penthouse. He paused. He's not alone. We count 6, maybe 7 individuals. They have equipment. Sebastian looked at the blacked-out panels covering the windows. He's been there since before we arrived, Marcus said. He was watching the ER. He followed the car. Claire stood up. He wasn't waiting to see how you'd respond. He already knew. She looked at Sebastian. The call was a timer. He called to start a clock, not to negotiate. Everything since that call has been movement, Sebastian said. Yes. He's been positioning his people this whole time while we've been talking. Yes. She looked at the blacked-out windows, 60 feet of reinforced glass behind automated panels, the city invisible behind them. And somewhere out there in the dark and the rain, at a north-facing window 17 floors up, a man who had spent 4 years carefully dismantling everything in this room was pointing something at all of it. Marcus's phone lit up. He looked at it. Something in his face shifted, barely perceptible, the kind of shift that happened when a professional received confirmation of something they'd been hoping not to confirm. The building's secondary power relay, he said. Someone just accessed the maintenance level. Sebastian was already moving toward his men near the elevator. They're cutting the security system from inside, Claire said. They have someone in the building, Marcus said. Already inside before we locked it down. The lights in the penthouse flickered once, just once. And then every screen, every panel, every automated system in the space went dark simultaneously, and the automated window coverings began to retract, and the city appeared behind the glass in all its wet, blazing sprawl. And Claire realized in the same moment that Sebastian did that they were now lit from behind by every light in the penthouse, visible from 17 floors across the street, in perfect, terrible detail. Sebastian hit the floor first, not because he panicked. Sebastian Hawthorne had not panicked in any situation Claire had ever witnessed, and he did not panic now, but because the tactical math resolved itself in approximately half a second and the floor was the correct answer. He came down and pulled Claire with him in the same motion, his right hand closing around her good arm and taking her weight as her knees hit the hardwood, and the city blazed through 60 feet of glass above them. Every raindrop on the exterior surface lit from behind by the penthouse's own lighting, and they were a perfect silhouette against it. "Lights," Sebastian said, and Marcus was already moving. The penthouse went dark 4 seconds later. Not the flicker of a system failing. Marcus had found the manual override, a physical breaker in the utility closet that predated the automated system, and the darkness that followed was total and immediate. The city outside became the only light source, and it came in cold and diffused through the rain-streaked glass, enough to move by, not enough to aim by. Claire pressed her back against the low sofa and held the drive in her right fist and breathed through the pain in her left arm where she'd caught herself on the floor wrong, and listened. Nothing came through the glass, no impact, no spiderweb fracture. Either the angle from across the street was worse than Marcus had assessed, or Richard's people were waiting for something other than a clean shot, or the darkness had reset the calculation entirely. "They're not shooting," she said very quietly. "They want the drive." Sebastian was 2 feet to her left, flat against the base of the sofa, his voice low and even. "A bullet through the glass doesn't get them the drive. It just destroys it." "So they're coming in." "They're already in. Someone on the maintenance level." Marcus crossed the room in a low crouch, moving with the confidence of a man who had memorized the space in better light. He reached Sebastian and pressed close. "2 of our people are heading down to the maintenance level now. Other 4 are holding the elevator and the stairwell doors on this floor. If they're coming up, they have 2 routes." "What's on the floor below us?" Sebastian said. "Mechanical. HVAC, water systems, unoccupied." "They won't come through the floor," Claire said. "Too much noise, too slow. They'll come through the elevator shaft or—" She stopped. "Or what?" Marcus said. She turned her head toward the ceiling. The penthouse occupied the top floor of the building, and above it was a private terrace, enclosed, accessible by a stairwell at the north end of the living space. "The roof," she said. Marcus was already moving, but he was moving toward the north stairwell door, and the sound came from there first. Not a gunshot, something more specific and more procedural. The soft pneumatic sound of a seal being broken, and then the particular silence that followed it that was shaped like men trying not to make noise. Marcus stopped 4 feet from the door and put his back to the wall beside it, and the door swung open fast, and something crossed the threshold, and the sound that followed was compact and efficient, and over in approximately 2 seconds, and then Marcus was pulling the man's body clear of the doorway, and 2 more of Sebastian's people were coming out of the stairwell dark behind him. "Roof's compromised," Marcus said. 2 more up there, maybe 3. We've bought 30 seconds. Sebastian got to his feet in the dark. Claire got to hers. Her arm was broadcasting at a frequency that made concentration difficult, and she concentrated anyway, because the alternative was not available. "Secondary elevator," Sebastian said. "Service elevator on the east side, yes." Marcus was checking the man he'd taken down. Alive, zip-tied now, with practiced speed. "But if they're already on the maintenance level, they may have that shaft controlled." "The drive's in the server room on 42, Sebastian said. "Can you get a copy onto the secure relay from there?" "If I have 12 uninterrupted minutes, yes." "Can we get you 12 minutes?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "That depends on what you give me to work with." Sebastian looked at Claire. Something moved between them in the dark that was a question and a conversation compressed into 3 seconds. "Go," she said. "I'll stay with him. We're a smaller target moving than a group." Go, Sebastian." He looked at her for 1 more second, and then he put his hand on the side of her face briefly. A contact so quick and precise that it didn't feel like tenderness, so much as information exchange, the way a field medic checks a pulse, and then he turned to Marcus and said, "Take 2 men, 42, 12 minutes. Then you come back up." Marcus moved. 2 men went with him toward the service corridor and the east elevator. That left Sebastian, Claire, and 2 of his remaining security detail in the dark penthouse, with the city blazing silently behind the glass, and somewhere above them 3 men on the roof who had been given 30 seconds and were now on the wrong side of 20. Sebastian moved to the kitchen counter and opened a drawer and removed a handgun with the efficiency of a man retrieving something he had put there for this specific reason. He checked it in the dark by feel. He moved back to where Claire was standing. "There's a room," he said, At the back of the building, no exterior windows, steel door, a safe room. Yes. She shook her head. Claire, if I'm in a sealed room, I'm not useful, and you need me useful. She looked at him. Ethan Caldwell is still out there. Whatever Richard has positioned tonight, Ethan is the one who can confirm the ledger's authenticity to any investigator. If we lose Ethan, we're not losing Ethan tonight. Where is he? Sebastian was quiet for one beat. My people picked him up 40 minutes ago. He's in a location 2 miles from here. She stared at him. I made calls from the car. He said it without apology. While you were talking to Marcus, Ethan Caldwell has been in my custody since approximately 12:45. She processed this. And you didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. Sebastian, I was managing the sequence. His voice was level and did not invite expansion. You weren't the only one running calculations tonight. The irony of it sat between them, without either of them naming it. And then the roof access door opened again, and Sebastian's 2 remaining men moved into position, and the next 90 seconds were loud in a way that precluded conversation. It was over fast. 2 of Richard's men came down the north stairwell and met Sebastian's security in the dark living space, and the exchange was close and brutal, and furniture broke, and someone hit the glass wall and left a mark in it. And then it was over, and both men were on the floor, and Sebastian's people were still standing, one of them with a cut above his eye that was producing blood at a rate that looked worse than it was. Claire had not moved from her position beside the kitchen island. She was holding the drive and watching the room and calculating, and what she was calculating was the thing she had not yet said, the piece of the 5th folder she had started to say earlier and had not finished because the sequence of events had overtaken it. Sebastian crossed to her. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked at her face. Something in her expression stopped him from the automatic reassurance he'd been about to deliver. The 5th folder, she said. The cross-references. I told you about the 7 confirmed casualties, the schedule of intercepted shipments. She paused. There's a name in the communications records that I didn't tell you about tonight. I don't know what I was waiting for. The right moment, a moment that wasn't already on fire. Tell me now. She looked at him steadily. The communications between Richard and Ethan's organization. There's a cutout, a third party who handled the most sensitive exchanges, someone who had access to your operational calendar, your personnel rotations, your private communications. She paused. The alias in the records resolves to someone inside your immediate circle, not a peripheral contact, someone you speak to daily. Sebastian was very still. I haven't confirmed the identity with certainty, she said. I have a strong inference from the communication patterns and the timing of certain information leaks. But I don't have a name attached to... Who? Sebastian said. The pattern points to someone who has been with you for at least 3 years, who has access to your schedule, your building's security architecture, your private communications. She held his gaze. Someone who would have known we were coming here tonight before Marcus made any calls. The quality of the silence changed. Sebastian did not move. He was running through names the way she had run through them, and she watched his face do the work, and she watched the moment it landed. Not a visible collapse, not shock in any dramatic form, but a very slight shift in the set of his jaw, the kind of shift that happened when a calculation produced a result that overturned too much at once. How long have you known? He said. 3 weeks, since I finished the cross-reference analysis. 3 weeks. I didn't know how to... 3 weeks, Claire. His voice was quiet and precise. You had a name, or close enough to a name, that could have told me there was a direct breach in my immediate circle, and you sat on it for 3 weeks. I didn't have confirmation. I still don't have... Who is it? He said it the way a man said something when he already knew the answer and was asking to see if the person in front of him would tell the truth. She looked at him. Marcus, she said. The pattern points to Marcus. The room was very quiet. Sebastian turned his head toward the east corridor where Marcus had gone with 2 men 12 minutes ago to copy the drive onto the secure relay at floor 42. 12 minutes. He'd asked for 12 minutes. Marcus had had 14. Sebastian moved toward the east corridor and Claire moved with him, and the 2 security men who were still standing fell into position behind them, and they took the service corridor at speed, past the utility closet and the mechanical access panel and the place where the building's secondary power relay had been accessed. And at the end of the corridor, Sebastian stopped. The service elevator doors were open. The car was at this floor. The doors were open, and the car was empty, and there was a phone on the floor of the elevator car, and Claire recognized the phone as belonging to one of the men who had gone down with Marcus. Sebastian picked it up, looked at the screen. A text message, received 4 minutes ago from an unlisted number. It read, "Drive copied, relay confirmed. Come down." Sebastian stared at the message for a long moment. Then he looked at the elevator shaft above the open car, looked up into the dark mechanical space above. And whatever he saw or didn't see resolved something in his expression that Claire had not seen before. Not the controlled grief of the casualties being reattributed. Not the cold assessment of the breach being located. Something that was, underneath all the machinery of the man he had built himself into, very close to devastation. "He sent the message himself," Sebastian said, "from one of my men's phones. He's been down there the whole time," Claire said. "He let your men come with him, and then—" She stopped. "And then he handled them," Sebastian said, "and copied the drive, and sent a message to bring me down alone." He looked at the elevator. "He's offering me a choice. Come down, and maybe he negotiates. Or don't come down, and he walks out with a copy of the only evidence that can end this. If he walks out with the copy, he delivers it to Richard. Richard now has the ledger and doesn't need Ethan anymore. Doesn't need either of us anymore." Sebastian looked at the phone in his hand. The clean room scenario. She stared at him. "He knew," Sebastian said. "He was in this room when you described it. He was standing 20 feet away. The full architecture of it closed around her all at once. Not like a door shutting, but like a space she had been standing in for 3 weeks, turning out to have a different shape than she'd thought. The ceiling lower, the walls closer. The exit not where the maps had indicated. Marcus had known about the clean room scenario for the last hour. Marcus had gone downstairs with a copy of the drive, and 2 men who were now unaccounted for. And somewhere below them, Richard Ashcroft was watching a building in the rain with 6 or 7 people, and the patience of a man who had been waiting 4 years and was content to wait a few more minutes. "He's going to walk out the maintenance level," Claire said. "Meet Richard's people outside with everything they need." Sebastian didn't answer because the answer was obvious. She looked at the elevator, at the phone in Sebastian's hand, at the open shaft and the dark above it, and the dark below it. "I need to go down," she said. "No, Sebastian, if Marcus walks out with that copy, Richard has the ledger, and not the version I built. A version Marcus has had 14 minutes to doctor, to edit, to reframe." She felt the drive in her right hand, the small, hard weight of it, the 2 years it represented. "Everything I built, it becomes a weapon pointed the wrong direction. They won't use it to destroy themselves. They'll use it to destroy you." Sebastian looked at her. "I know Ethan Caldwell," she said. "I spent 2 years sitting across from him at conference tables and learning how he thinks. He is the only person who can stand in front of a federal investigator and confirm the authenticity of the original ledger against whatever version Marcus and Richard produce." She met Sebastian's eyes. "But you need to get to him first, right now, before Richard's people realize he's in your custody and move to eliminate him. And you." "I go down. You have a broken arm, and no, I have the original drive." She held it up. "And I have 2 years of learning how to be the most useful person in whatever room I'm in, under any circumstances, with whatever I have available." She looked at him steadily. "Get to Ethan. I'll hold Marcus long enough to—" "To what, Claire? To what exactly?" She didn't answer that, because the honest answer was that she didn't know, and Sebastian could see that she didn't know. And he was doing the calculation she was doing and arriving at the same place she was, which was that every option available had a catastrophic failure mode, and the question was which failure mode they could survive. His jaw tightened. He reached out and took the drive from her hand, and for 1 second she thought he was overriding her, taking the decision away. And then she felt something slide over her knuckles, and looked down and saw that he had put a ring on her finger. Not a gesture, practical. The ring had a stone, not large, not decorative, functional, and the stone had a seam, and inside the seam was a microdrive that she understood, looking at it, had been prepared and loaded before tonight, loaded with something he had been carrying as a contingency for reasons that suddenly made terrible sense. Secondary copy, he said. Partial. Enough to confirm the ledger's authenticity if the original is compromised. He held her gaze. I've been carrying that for 6 months, since the first time I had reason to think someone close to me was moving against us. He paused. I didn't know who. I was waiting. She stared at the ring. I know, he said quietly. We both have things we've been waiting to say. The sound from the elevator shaft below them changed, a shift in the mechanical resonance, the cable system engaging, the car beginning to move without anyone having pressed a... The elevator was moving without them. Sebastian hit the manual override panel beside the shaft door, and the mechanism engaged with a grinding resistance that meant someone at the bottom had already tried to lock the car in place, and the two systems argued with each other for approximately 3 seconds before Sebastian won by virtue of having physical access to the breaker. The car stopped between floors, which meant Marcus was now between floors in a steel box with whatever he'd taken from the 2 men who'd gone down with him, and a copied drive, and the specific problem of a shaft that wasn't moving. Sebastian looked at the stairwell door to his right, then at Claire. East stairwell goes to 42, he said. If he forces the doors between floors, he comes out on 41 or 43. My men are on 43. What's on 41? Vacant. Renovation. She was already moving toward the east stairwell before he finished the sentence, and he caught her arm, the right one, carefully. And she turned, and he looked at her with something that had run out of space to be anything except what it was. You come back, he said. It wasn't a request, and it wasn't a question. It was a man who had spent 2 years on the wrong side of a disappeared woman, stating the only condition he had left. Get to Ethan, she said. She went through the stairwell door. The stairwell was concrete and emergency lighting, the kind of red-tinted dim that turned everything the color of old photographs. And she took the stairs down at a controlled pace because running on a wet stairwell with one functional arm and a pain level that was now registering somewhere above the number she'd given the PA was the fastest route to a broken ankle on top of everything else. She passed the 43rd floor door. She could hear Sebastian's men on the other side of it, the low exchange of voices, and kept going. 42. The door to 42 was a fire door with a push bar, and she hit it with her right shoulder and came through into the server room corridor, which was lit with the blue-white operational lighting of a room that ran on its own power circuit. And the first thing she saw was one of Sebastian's men sitting against the wall with his head back and his eyes closed and his hands zip-tied in front of him with his own restraints, alive. She checked his pulse with 2 fingers against his throat. Alive, steady, something chemical. Sedated, not damaged. The second man was around the corner, same condition. Marcus had been efficient. She had known Marcus was efficient. She had watched him work for approximately 2 hours and had assessed him as a professional of the highest order and had spent 3 weeks sitting on the assessment of what that professionalism was actually in service of. And now she was standing in a corridor with 2 sedated men in a server room door that was slightly open and a light on inside it. She pushed the door open. Marcus was standing at the server bank with his back to her, and the drive was plugged into a relay port, and a progress bar on the screen in front of him said, "Transfer complete." And he turned around when she came through the door, the way a man turned when he'd heard footsteps for the last 30 seconds, and had already finished deciding how he was going to handle whatever came through. He looked at her arm. At her right hand? Empty. At her face. "You came down alone," he said. "Sebastian is handling the other problem." "Richard's people." "Yes." He nodded slowly. He reached up and unplugged the drive from the relay port and held it loosely in his right hand, and he looked at her with an expression that was not quite guilt and not quite defiance, something in between, the expression of a man who had made a decision a long time ago and had spent a long time making peace with it and was now standing in front of one of its consequences. "The cross-references," he said. "You found me in the 5th folder. 3 weeks ago. And you didn't tell him. I needed confirmation." "Is this confirmation enough?" She looked at the drive in his hand, at the progress bar that said transfer complete, at the relay port with its green active light still blinking. "Where did you send it?" she said. He didn't answer. "Marcus." She kept her voice level. It cost her something. "Where did you send the copy?" "It doesn't matter where I sent it." He set the drive down on the server console beside him and put his hands in his pockets and looked at her with the exhausted candor of a man who had stopped performing. Richard has what he needs. Whatever happens in the next 2 hours, the outcome has a predetermined architecture. Sebastian is going to have a very bad week, regardless of what you do with the original. Ethan Caldwell, she said. Sebastian has him. Something moved in Marcus's face. Rapid recalculation, rapidly controlled. Since when? Since the car. Sebastian made calls while we were in transit. She watched him absorb it. Ethan is the authentication mechanism. Whatever version of the ledger Richard's people produce, Ethan can testify to the original. You know that. Ethan can also be managed, Marcus said. Richard has people at every location Sebastian uses. It's a very short list of places. Not short enough. She held his gaze. Where is Richard right now? In the building across the street, or somewhere closer? Marcus didn't answer, and the non-answer was its own answer, and something crystallized for her that she had been holding just short of certainty since the elevator started moving. He's in the building, she said. He's already inside. The maintenance breach was cover, Marcus said, and his voice had the quality of a man who had stopped seeing the point of misdirection. Getting your attention on the external threat, on the building across the street, while Richard came in through the parking structure. He's been in the building for 40 minutes. She felt the specific cold that wasn't about temperature, the cold of a plan being turned inside out, the cold of 2 years of construction being revealed as a frame built around a void. Sebastian, she said. Sebastian is on the penthouse floor with 2 men, Marcus said, and Richard is somewhere between floor 40 and the roof with 4, and I have the copied drive, and in approximately 8 minutes a federal vehicle is going to arrive at the building's front entrance because someone made an anonymous call 45 minutes ago about criminal activity at this address. He looked at her steadily. When federal agents walk into this building, they're going to find a man with Sebastian's profile in a building where criminal activity has just occurred, and they're going to find documentation, the copy I just sent, that has been edited to position him as the principal. The 8 minutes landed like a physical weight. You need to call it off, she said. I can't call off a federal response. The edited copy, you can... It's already transmitted. He said it without heat. Claire, it's done. The version of the ledger that's going to land on a federal desk tonight has Sebastian at the center of it, Richard at the periphery. You as a co-conspirator who ran an infiltration operation with Sebastian's full knowledge and authorization. He paused. It's a clean inversion. 2 years of your work, pointed backward. She stared at him. I'm sorry, he said. That's not a performance. I am actually sorry. Sebastian is... He stopped. Something crossed his face that was genuine and that he didn't try to hide. He was worth better than this, I know that. Then stop it. I can't stop it. You can walk up those stairs and tell Sebastian where Richard is and help him. I can't. His voice shifted, still level, but underneath it something that sounded like the specific fear of a man who had a liability that superseded loyalty. I have a daughter. She's 9 years old. She lives with her mother in Portland, and Richard has known where she lives for the past 2 years, and that is the architecture of my participation in this. Not money, not ideology, not ambition. He looked at her with the direct exhaustion of a man putting down something heavy. I want you to understand that, even if it doesn't change anything. The room was very quiet. She understood it. That was the worst part. She understood it completely. The specific vulnerability that a person leverages when they want something durable and reliable from another person. The clean brutality of threatening a child. And she understood that Marcus had been living inside that leverage for 2 years, and that the man in front of her was not a traitor in any of the simple narrative forms, but something more complicated and more ruined. It didn't change anything. 7 minutes, she said. Yes. The original drive. She looked at it sitting on the console. If I walk out of this room with the original, the copy I sent is already in transit. The original's authentication value decreases significantly once the edited version hits a federal desk and establishes a framework. He said it technically, without cruelty. You'd have to get a qualified forensic accountant to certify the discrepancies between the 2 versions, and that takes time you don't have. And the federal agents walking into this building in 7 minutes are not going to pause to conduct a forensic comparison. She looked at the drive. She looked at the ring on her finger, the partial copy. Enough to confirm the ledger's authenticity. Sebastian had said it. Enough to confirm, not to replace. She had not told Marcus about the ring. Marcus had been in the room when Sebastian had described the secondary copy in the server room, but he had not been in the corridor when Sebastian had slipped the ring onto her finger, and the ring was on her left hand, which she had been holding close to her body since the pain made any other position untenable. She did the calculation in the time it took to exhale. The partial copy in the ring wasn't enough on its own. But paired with Ethan Caldwell's testimony and the original drive, it created a three-source authentication that no edited version could survive. The edited copy Richard was counting on required the original to be absent or compromised. The original had to disappear before the federal agents arrived, or the whole inversion collapsed, which meant Richard needed to be in this building, in this corridor, in the next 6 minutes. She looked at Marcus. "You said Richard has 4 men with him," she said. "Yes. And he's between 40 and the roof. As of 12 minutes ago." "Call him," she said. Marcus stared at her. "Call Richard. Tell him the original drive is on 42 and the woman who has it is alone." She held his gaze. "Let him come to me." "That's a terrible idea," she said. "I know. Call him anyway." "Claire, you said you were sorry." Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that, considering what her arm was doing and what her heart rate was doing, and what the room looked like under the blue-white operational lighting when she thought about what she was asking for. "This is how sorry looks. Call him. Give me the original drive. And then go upstairs and tell Sebastian exactly where Richard is going to be in the next 4 minutes." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. She watched him run the calculation pool, the daughter in Portland against the man upstairs, the leverage he'd been living under against whatever he had not yet entirely surrendered of the person he'd been before the leverage was applied. He picked up his phone. He made the call. He said 4 words. "She's on 42. He hung up. He picked up the drive and held it out to her, and she took it with her right hand and held it against her chest. And he looked at her one last time with the expression of a man stepping off something. "Go," she said. He went. She heard his footsteps in the corridor, moving toward the stairwell, moving up. She had approximately 3 minutes. She looked at the server room, at the relay port, at the progress bar that still said transfer complete, and had a log entry below it that included a transmission address she could see from where she was standing. And she looked at it for 2 seconds, and then she crossed to the console and pulled up the relay log, and found the transmission record and the destination address, and she photographed it with the second phone she'd been carrying in her coat pocket since an hour before any of this started. The clean phone, the one with no number attached, the one she'd paid cash for 6 weeks ago and charged once and kept for a situation exactly like this one. The photograph wouldn't stop the transmission. The copy was already in transit. But a federal agent with a transmission log and a destination address could interrupt a filing before it was acted upon if the agent received the log in the next, she checked the time, 5 minutes. She sent the photograph to the number she had memorized 8 months ago and never used. A contact inside the FBI's Financial Crimes Division who had been receiving anonymous tips from an unnamed source inside Ethan Caldwell's operation for 14 months, and who had, she calculated, enough institutional investment in the source's credibility to take a 5-minute interruption call seriously. She sent it. She put the phone away. Then she put the original drive in the inside pocket of her ruined coat, and she stood in the middle of the server room under the blue-white light, and she waited. She heard them in the corridor 40 seconds later, not trying to be quiet now. 4 men and a purpose and a timeline, moving through a building they believed they controlled. The door opened and Richard Ashcroft came through it first, which she had not expected, because men who sent other men through doors first were acknowledging uncertainty, and Richard had apparently decided that uncertainty was behind him. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of lean that came from decades of discipline. He had the bearing of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms with powerful people and had learned to occupy space the way powerful people did, not because he was born to it, but because he had studied it with the specific dedication of someone who intended to have it. He was wearing a dark coat, and there were 3 men behind him, and all 3 of them were the kind of men who didn't require introduction. He looked at her arm, at the splint, at her right hand, which was empty. "The drive," he said. He said it the way a person said something they had been waiting to say for longer than was comfortable. "You're going to have a problem," she said. In about 4 minutes. He looked at her without expression. The federal agents arriving at this building, she said. They're not going to find what you've arranged for them to find. The copy has been transmitted. I sent the transmission log to a contact in financial crimes 8 minutes ago. She watched his face. They're going to intercept the filing before it's docketed, which means the edited version doesn't establish the framework you need before the original gets in front of anyone. She paused. You're 4 minutes away from federal agents walking into a building where you're standing with 3 armed men and a woman with a broken arm, and the story doesn't read the way you wrote it. Something moved in Richard's face. Rapid assessment, rapid recalibration. She watched him do it and watched him arrive at the place she'd known he'd arrive at. The clean room scenario, stripped of all its scaffolding, reduced to its terminal option. The drive, he said again. And this time it wasn't a transaction. It was a different kind of statement. She held his gaze and she did not step back. And she thought about the 2 years she had spent in a city building, a case for a man she had left because someone in this room had told her it was the only way to save him. And she thought about the ring on her left hand and the partial copy inside it. And she thought about the specific, geometric shape of the bet she was making right now, and whether she had calculated correctly, and whether Sebastian had made it to Ethan, and whether Marcus had told him what floor she was on, and then she stopped thinking about all of it because Richard nodded at the man on his left, and the man stepped forward and grabbed her broken arm, and the pain that detonated up from her elbow to her shoulder was the kind that didn't leave room for anything else. And she heard herself make a sound she hadn't intended to make. And Richard reached into her coat pocket with the other hand while the first man held her immobile. And his fingers closed around the drive, and he pulled it out, and he looked at it, and he looked at her, and he said, "Was it worth it?" She was breathing through her teeth. Her vision had narrowed at the edges. She looked at him through the narrowed vision, and she thought about the answer to that question, and she thought about Sebastian's hand on her face in the dark penthouse, and she thought about the ring, and she thought about all the things Worth was and wasn't. "Ask me in 20 minutes, she said. And then the server room door came off its hinges. Not the handle, not the lock. The hinges, physically, the door itself, blown inward by something applied to the exterior with the specific force of a man who was not interested in procedure. The man holding Claire's arm released it because he had to, because the door was in the space where he was standing, and Claire dropped and put the console between herself and the room and curled around her arm and concentrated on not losing consciousness. The next 60 seconds were the loudest she could remember. Contained space amplified everything, every impact, every shout, every crash of a body against a metal server rack. And she stayed down and held her arm and counted heartbeats because counting was the only discipline available. When it stopped, the silence was the specific silence of aftermath. She heard Sebastian's breathing before she heard anything else. Harsh, elevated. The breathing of a man who had just moved very fast and applied a great deal of force. She raised her head above the console. Richard Ashcroft was on the floor with Sebastian's knee on his back and his arms wrenched behind him and his face against the concrete, and the 3 men who had come in with him were in various stages of the same condition, attended to by 2 men she didn't recognize who had come in through the door behind Sebastian. Not his regular security detail, not Marcus, someone new, someone who had come from somewhere else in the last 4 minutes. Sebastian was looking at her across the room. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. There was blood on his left hand that might have been his. His breathing was the breathing of a man running on the far edge of his reserves and not bothering to hide it. "The drive," she said. Her voice came out rough. He looked at Richard's right hand. The drive was still in it, fingers clenched around it. Sebastian reached down and took it with a grip that didn't negotiate, and Richard made a sound and released it. Sebastian stood up. He crossed the room and he crouched down in front of her behind the console, and he looked at her arm and at her face and at the specific color of her, which she imagined was not good. "Ethan," she said. "Secured. 2 blocks from here. Federal agents are with him now." His voice was still rough from the exertion. "Your contact at Financial Crimes intercepted the transmitted copy 14 seconds before it was docketed." He paused. 14 seconds, Claire. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "Marcus," she said, "upstairs. Under guard." His voice didn't change when he said it, which was its own kind of grief, managed with the same machinery he managed everything. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and he was right there, close enough that she could see the blood on his hand clearly now. A cut across the knuckle, that was still producing. And she thought about 14 seconds, and about a ring on her finger, and about the specific mathematics of how close everything had just come to. She didn't move for a long time after that. Sebastian stayed crouched in front of her, and she stayed behind the console, and neither of them spoke. And the men behind them were making the procedural sounds of aftermath, zip ties, low instructions, the careful movement of bodies from one position to another. And Richard Ashcroft was on the floor saying nothing, which was its own kind of statement from a man who had spent 4 years saying the right things to the right people at exactly the right moments. Her arm had gone past the grinding register into something quieter and more total, the way extreme pain sometimes resolved into a whole-body numbness that wasn't relief, but was at least a different relationship with the damage. She held it against her chest and breathed and looked at Sebastian's face, which was still close, still carrying the exertion in the set of his jaw and the depth of his breathing. "The federal agents outside," she said. "How many?" "Enough." He said it simply. Your contact moved fast. She had a team already positioned because she'd been sitting on 14 months of anonymous tips and waiting for exactly this kind of confirmation. He paused. "She's going to want to talk to you." "I know. Tonight." "I know, Sebastian." He looked at her arm. "You need a hospital." "I need 5 minutes first." He didn't argue it. He sat down on the floor in front of her, which was not a thing she had ever seen Sebastian Hawthorne do in any circumstance. Sit on a floor, in a torn shirt, with blood on his hand, in a server room that smelled of concrete and electrical equipment and recent violence. And the ordinariness of it, the complete absence of performance, undid something in her chest that she had been holding together through 2 years of careful maintenance. She looked at the drive in his hand. "Richard built the whole thing on a single assumption," she said, "that I would stay gone, that sending me away would create a permanent blind spot in your operation, someone you'd never look for because you'd have no reason to look, someone on the inside who knew everything and could feed it outward indefinitely." She paused. "He didn't account for what I'd do with the 2 years." "No," Sebastian said. "He didn't. He thought I'd survive, build something small, stay hidden because staying hidden was the safest option." She looked at the wall. "He didn't know me well enough. He knew you well enough to know you'd believe him when he said leaving was the only way to protect me." She heard the weight in that. Not accusation anymore. They were past that. The accusation had burned off in the last 4 hours, along with a great deal of other things that had needed burning. What was left was just the truth of it, held out plainly between them. "He knew I loved you," she said. "That was the whole mechanism. Everything else was scaffolding." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Outside the server room, in the corridor, someone was on a radio. The clipped exchange of law enforcement coordinating across floors. The building was no longer only theirs. "We need to move," he said, "before the federal team reaches this floor and finds us sitting on the floor behind a console." She almost laughed. Came out wrong. Too close to the other thing, the thing she wasn't going to do in a server room on the 42nd floor, but Sebastian saw it and something in his face shifted toward what might have been, in better circumstances, a smile. He got to his feet. He held out his right hand. She took it and he pulled her up carefully, taking all the weight she needed him to take. And she stood in the blue-white light of the server room, with her ruined arm and her clean phone and the ring on her finger, and looked at Richard Ashcroft on the floor. Richard looked back at her. His face was the face of a man who had run out of rooms to maneuver in, which was a face she had never seen on him in all the years she had known him as Sebastian's father's trusted counsel. His steady presence at every table, his voice of measured reason in every crisis. He had always had somewhere else to go. He had always had a contingency. He was looking at the drive in Sebastian's hand. "It won't hold," Richard said. His voice was still composed. Even now, even on a concrete floor with zip ties on his wrists, he reached for composure the way some men reached for weapons. "The authentication? Ethan Caldwell is 2 blocks from here," Claire said. "He's been in federal custody for the last 2 hours. He's been talking." She looked at Richard steadily. "He has a very strong motivation to be cooperative, given that the alternative is carrying the primary liability for an operation that is now fully documented in its original form." She paused. "He'll authenticate everything." Richard looked at her for a long moment. She watched him process the complete closure of the architecture he'd built, the way every exit resolved into the same room. He had spent 4 years constructing a path to the thing he wanted, and he had built it well. It had almost worked. 4 years of it had almost worked, and 14 seconds had been the margin, and that margin had come from a woman he'd dismissed as a variable he could control through love. He looked away from her, at the floor. It was the first time in any of the years she had known him that Richard Ashcroft had nothing left to say. The federal agents reached the 42nd floor 6 minutes later, and the server room became a scene with a procedural logic that superseded everything else. Identification, documentation, the careful choreography of law enforcement taking custody of something that had been built over years and come apart in hours. Claire gave her name to a woman with a federal badge who looked at her arm and immediately called for a medic. Sebastian stood beside her and answered questions in the flat, cooperative register of a man who had been in rooms with law enforcement before and knew how to be present without being useful until he had counsel present, which he requested within the first 45 seconds. The woman with the federal badge was Special Agent Dana Rice, and Claire recognized the name before she saw it on the badge. She had been sending anonymous tips to that inbox for 14 months, had built a relationship with a person she'd never spoken to entirely through documentation, and Dana Rice looked at her with an expression that was professional and contained and also carried the specific quality of someone meeting a source in person for the first time after a long correspondence. "You're the one who sent the transmission log," Dana Rice said. "Yes." 14 months of tips. "Yes." Dana looked at her arm, at the ring on her left hand, at Sebastian beside her, who was watching this exchange with the still attention of a man who was filing everything for later consideration. "We're going to need a full debrief," Dana said. "Timeline, methodology, chain of custody for the original drive." She paused. "It's going to be a long night." "It's already been a long night," Claire said. "Longer," Dana said, not unkindly. They took Richard Ashcroft out of the building at 2:17 in the morning, and Claire watched it happen from the corridor where a medic was reevaluating her arm splint with the focused displeasure of a medical professional assessing someone else's fieldwork. The elevator doors opened, and 4 federal agents came through, and 2 of them had Richard between them, and he walked through the corridor with his hands cuffed in front of him and his silver hair disheveled for the first time she had ever seen, and he did not look at her as he passed. She watched him go. She had expected to feel more than she felt. 2 years of building toward this, 2 years of sitting across tables from people who worked for the man who had dismantled her life, and what she felt watching Richard Ashcroft walk to a federal vehicle was primarily exhaustion, which was perhaps the most honest response available. Sebastian came and stood beside her. "Marcus," she said, "upstairs. Federal agents have him." He was quiet for a moment. He gave them everything on Richard's leverage operation. "The daughter in Portland, they've already made contact with local authorities there, established that she's safe." He paused. "He cooperated fully. That'll matter in how it's charged. He spent 2 years feeding your operation to people who used it to hurt you." "Yes." "And you're—" She looked at him. "I'm not anything right now," Sebastian said. I'll be something about it later. Right now I don't have the capacity." He said the word carefully, like he was choosing it precisely. "He was my best man. At our first wedding." He stopped. "At the wedding we didn't have." She heard what was underneath that. The specific register of a betrayal that had personal dimensions beyond the operational, beyond the 4 years of damage, reaching back to something that predated all of it. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's not yours to be sorry for." "I know, I'm still sorry." He looked at his hand, the cut across the knuckle, which had been cleaned and closed with a steri strip by the same medic who was unhappy about her splint. He looked at it for a moment in the way that people looked at physical damage when they were actually thinking about something else. "The wedding," he said. "The one we didn't have. I need to ask you something about it." She waited. "When you were standing at the hotel mirror getting ready," he said, "before Richard came to the room, before everything, were you happy?" The question was very quiet. It was the question underneath all the other questions, the one that had been waiting under the architecture of the last 4 hours for someone to get down to the foundation. She looked at the corridor wall, at the federal activity beyond it, the systematic dismantling of an operation that had lived inside Sebastian's empire for 4 years. At the medic who was pretending not to listen while pretending to finish his notes. "I was terrified," she said. "Not of you, not of us. I was terrified of not deserving it, of being the thing that cost you everything because I wasn't Because I hadn't. She stopped, started again. I had convinced myself that the happiness was temporary, that something with that specific weight was always borrowed, that the accounting would come due eventually. She paused. Richard told me what I was already afraid of. That's how it worked. He didn't invent the fear. He just knew exactly where it lived. Sebastian was listening without expression. So yes, she said, I was happy. I was the happiest I had ever been in my life, standing in a hotel mirror at 7 in the morning, and then Richard knocked on the door and I let the fear do the rest. He absorbed this in silence. I've thought about that knock every day for 2 years, he said. I know. No, I mean, he stopped, looked at her. I've thought about whether if I'd gotten to you 5 minutes before he did, if I'd come to the room early to see you, whether it would have changed anything, whether you'd have told me what he said, or whether the fear would have found another door. He paused. I've thought about it, and I've never been able to answer it. She thought about it now the way she hadn't let herself think about it for 2 years. The hotel room, the morning light, her own face in the mirror. If Sebastian had knocked first, if he'd come in and found her already, with the fear at the surface, already calculating. I think I would have told you, she said. I think seeing your face would have... I think it would have been different. She paused. But I don't know. I'm not sure I'm a reliable narrator of what I would have done. None of us are, he said. The medic finished his notes and excused himself with the professional discretion of a man who had assessed the situation correctly. Down the corridor, Dana Rice was directing the secure transport of the server room's contents, the drives and the relay logs, and the documentation that would form the basis of what was going to be a very long federal process. Claire looked at the ring on her finger, the stone with the seam, the micro drive inside it, the partial copy that hadn't been needed in the end because Marcus had gone upstairs when she told him to, and Sebastian had reached them in time, and 14 seconds had been enough of a margin. Barely. This is yours, she said, and began to take it off. Don't. His voice was immediate, and she stopped. She looked at him. I've been carrying that ring for 6 months, he said, as a contingency. That's what I told myself, a practical backup system. He looked at the ring on her fingers. That's not what it was. She held very still. I kept it because I couldn't get rid of it, he said. Every month I told myself this was the month I stopped carrying it. That was not a professional assessment. That was a man who hadn't finished hoping. And I am aware of how that sounds coming from someone who runs what I run. He paused. I don't need you to say anything about it right now. I need you to leave the ring where it is. She left it where it was. Down the corridor, Dana Rice appeared in the server room doorway and looked at Claire with the expression of a woman whose patience was professional rather than unlimited. We need to start the debrief, Dana said. It can't wait until morning. The Caldwell authentication needs to be established before his attorney gets him in a room. Claire nodded. Give me 2 minutes. Dana looked at Sebastian, at the ring, at the specific geometry of the space between them, which she was clearly capable of reading accurately. She went back into the server room. Claire looked at Sebastian. I'm going to be in a federal debriefing room for the next several hours, she said. I know. You should have counsel present when they talk to you. Everything you say tonight is going to be part of a record that... Claire, his voice was gentle and exact. I've managed federal investigations before. I'll be fine. I know you will. She paused. She stopped. You just what? She looked at his face, at the exhaustion in it, and the damage. And underneath both of those things, the same thing that had been underneath them for 4 hours. The thing she hadn't let herself look at directly, because there hadn't been time, and there hadn't been safety, and there had always been one more calculation to run. I need you to still be here in the morning, she said, when the debriefing is done. I need there to be a morning that's different from the last 2 years of mornings. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. The building hummed around them, the specific hum of a city night, rain still audible somewhere above them through the ventilation, the Hudson, out there somewhere in the dark, carrying the weather south toward the bay. I've been here every morning for 2 years, he said. I just didn't have you in them. She held his gaze and then she turned and walked down the corridor toward the server room and Dana Rice and the beginning of the procedural dismantling of everything that had been built in the dark over 4 years, and she didn't look back. Not because she was running, but because she already knew he was watching and she didn't need to check. The debrief took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Dana Rice was precise and thorough and had done her homework. 14 months of anonymous documentation had prepared her well, and the questions she asked were the questions of someone who had been building a parallel picture from the outside and was now calibrating it against a source from the inside. Claire answered everything. She had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this conversation, and she gave it completely and without reservation. The entire architecture of the infiltration, the methodology, the timeline, the chain of custody for every document on the drive, the cross-reference analysis in the 5th folder, the transmission log she'd photographed in the server room. She gave them Marcus. She gave them the daughter in Portland and the leverage structure and the specific way it had been applied. And she watched Dana Rice write it down and understood that this would be the difference between a conspiracy charge and something that had more complicated dimensions when it reached a courtroom. She gave them Richard Ashcroft in the fullest terms she had available, not just the financial crimes and the operational betrayal, but the 4 years of strategic damage, the 7 confirmed casualties she could document, the frame he had built for Sebastian, and the mechanism by which he had intended to deliver it. She gave them Ethan Caldwell's role and his cooperation, and the specific transfers that linked Caldwell's operation to Richard's payment structure. She gave them everything and she held nothing back, because holding things back had been the operating mode for 2 years, and it had kept her alive and kept the case intact, and it had also cost her every morning of those 2 years, and she was finished with the economics of secrecy. When Dana Rice closed her notebook at 6:43 in the morning, she looked at Claire with an expression that had moved past professional into something more like recognition. "You built this alone," Dana said. "For 2 years." "I wasn't doing it alone," Claire said. "I was doing it for someone." Dana looked at the ring on Claire's left hand. "He's been in the building this whole time, waiting." "I know." "You should go," Dana said. "We'll need you back tomorrow. There's going to be a long process, but—" She paused. "You should go." The sun was coming up. She knew it before she reached the penthouse floor, knew it from the quality of the light in the elevator. The way the city visible through the small rectangular window of the elevator door had shifted from the smeared orange of streetlights to something cooler and more primary. The rain had stopped. She didn't know when exactly. Sometime in the middle of the debrief, the sound of it against the building had faded, and she hadn't noticed the absence until now, standing in the elevator going up, and the absence of the rain felt like the morning's first declarative sentence. The penthouse door opened and she walked in. The space had been cleared and cleaned with the specific efficiency of Sebastian's operation. The broken furniture gone, the mark on the glass wall addressed, the automated panels retracted so that the morning city came through the full 60 feet of it unobstructed. New York in the early light after rain had a quality that she had forgotten in 2 years of living small, of keeping curtains drawn and profiles low and horizons managed. It was enormous and indifferent and absolutely real, the skyline carrying the first full light of the day along its edges, the river visible to the west with the sun arriving on it in long horizontal lines. Sebastian was standing at the glass. He had changed his shirt. The cut on his hand had been properly bandaged. He was holding a cup of coffee and looking at the city the way a man looked at something he had been responsible for and had almost lost and had not lost. And he heard her come in and turned. She looked like what she was, someone who had been awake all night in the middle of a crisis and had come out the other side of it wearing the evidence. Her hair was wrecked. Her coat was destroyed. The splint on her arm was going to need a surgeon's attention before noon. There were shadows under her eyes that 2 years of difficult living had put there, and a specific quality of stillness in the way she moved that was not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of a person who had run out of things to brace for. He set the coffee down. She crossed the room and stopped in front of him, close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his eyes. And they stood there in the morning light coming off the wet city, and the 2 years were present in the room. Not as an accusation, not as a wound requiring immediate attention, but as a thing that had happened, that had its own weight and its own truth, that neither of them was going to be able to simply set down. "The orthopedic surgeon is coming at 8, he said. "I called her an hour ago." Of course you did. You're going to need a proper cast. The field splint, Sebastian. The PA's work wasn't bad, but it was not Sebastian. She said it quietly. Stop managing. He stopped. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the city spread behind him in the morning light, 60 feet of it, unobstructed. I have spent 2 years being very good at being alone, she said. I am genuinely excellent at it. I have built a skill set around it that is... It is remarkable, actually, how proficient I became. She paused. I don't want to be proficient at it anymore. He was listening. I want to fight with you about things that don't matter, she said. I want to disagree with you about restaurants, and about whether certain decisions were operationally sound, and about all the ordinary frictions that I gave up the right to 2 years ago. She held his gaze. I want mornings, plural, consecutive. I want the version of this where we build something together instead of me building it in the dark and sliding it under the door. He looked at her for a long time. The morning light was full now, coming in from the east and spreading across the hardwood and the low furniture and the glass. And it found her face, and found the ring on her left hand, and found the exhaustion and the determination and the 2 years sitting in her eyes alongside the things she'd just said. You know what I am, he said. It was not a deflection. It was the same candor she had just offered him, returned in kind. What I run, what that means about the kind of mornings we'd be building. I've spent 2 years inside the closest thing to your world, she said. I know exactly what you are. And I'm not asking you to be something else. She looked at him steadily. I'm asking you to let me stand next to what you actually are, instead of what Richard convinced me I couldn't survive. Sebastian picked up the ring hand, held it, looked at the ring he had put there in a service corridor at 3 a.m. as a contingency measure that wasn't a contingency measure. The engagement, he said slowly. The one we technically still have, since I never... He paused. Since I left before we got to the formally, she said. Yes. She looked at the ring. Is that a question? It's a question. She looked up at him. The city was fully lit now, all of it, every tower and bridge and wet rooftop catching the early sun, the Hudson throwing it back in broken lines, the whole enormous and different beautiful machine of the place running on its own logic the way it always had, regardless of what happened inside any one building on any one night. Yes, she said. He pulled her in carefully, with a specific attention to the arm, and she put her head against his chest and felt the specific weight and warmth of him that she had told herself for 2 years she had correctly catalogued in memory and had not come close. And she stood there in the morning light while the city moved outside the glass and let 2 years of careful solitude dissolve into something that did not require her to hold it together by herself. She heard his heartbeat, slower now than in the server room, moving back toward its ordinary rate. They stood there for a while. The federal process, she said eventually, into the fabric of his shirt. I know. It's going to be months, maybe longer. There are going to be investigators in your business for... I know. And Richard's going to have attorneys who... Claire, his voice rumbled in his chest. I know all of this. She was quiet for a moment. I'm doing it again. Managing. Yes. I know you are. He kept his arm around her carefully. I'm going to need you to get reasonably good at not doing that. It's going to be a process. I managed my way across 2 years and a criminal infiltration operation. You did? It's a deeply ingrained habit. I've noticed. She was quiet again. Outside, Manhattan moved through its early morning, the first traffic noise beginning to reach them at this height, the city establishing its daily logic, the Hudson still throwing light back at the sky. Somewhere in a federal building 2 blocks away, Ethan Caldwell was still talking to investigators, trading everything he had for the best deal available. Somewhere in federal custody, Richard Ashcroft was sitting in the specific silence of a man who had run out of rooms. Marcus was somewhere in that process too, and she let herself think about his daughter in Portland, 9 years old, safe, unaware of the specific machinery of fear that had been run through her father for 2 years. And she thought about what it cost a person to be leveraged through someone they loved. And she thought about the difference between that and what she had done 2 years ago. Whether there was a difference. Whether love as a mechanism of control was the same thing regardless of the direction it was applied from. and she decided that she did not have the answer to that question this morning, and that this morning was perhaps not required to hold that question. She lifted her head, looked at him. "The orthopedic surgeon," she said. "At 8. 20 minutes. I need coffee first." "There's coffee, and I need to tell you something before she gets here." She looked at him. "About the 5th folder. There are 2 names in the cross-references that I didn't give to Dana Rice last night, because they're peripheral contacts. People Richard fed information to who may not have known the full picture of what they were participating in." She paused. "I need you to see them before anyone else does, because one of them is someone you've known for a long time, and I don't know what it means yet, and I didn't want you to find out from a federal document." Well. He looked at her. "That's a conversation for after the surgeon," he said. "Sebastian, after," he said, and his voice was firm but not hard. "Whatever it is, it'll be the same information in an hour that it is right now. And you've been awake all night, and you've been through—" He stopped, looked at her arm, at her face, at the general condition of her, which told a detailed story about the last 8 hours. "You have exactly 20 minutes to drink coffee and exist without calculating anything. I need you to take the 20 minutes. She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. He went to get the coffee, and she went to the glass and stood with her good arm across her body and looked at the city in the full morning light. The river, the bridges, the towers doing their ordinary work of holding up the sky, 2 years of small rooms and managed horizons and careful erasure, and here was the skyline exactly as it had always been, not waiting for her, not changed, just present, the way the city was always just present, enormous and ongoing and entirely real. She heard Sebastian behind her, his footsteps, the small sound of a cup set on the table. She turned. He was standing in this morning light in his own apartment, with coffee, with his hand bandaged and his shirt clean, and all the damage of the night visible in the specific way he was holding himself. And he looked at her the way he had looked at her in this apartment 2 years ago, when this had been the ordinary furniture of their life. And the thing she had been afraid to deserve was right here in the morning light being offered without requirement or condition. The way the best things were always offered when they were genuine. She crossed the room and picked up the coffee. She stood next to him at the table. Outside, the city ran its own numbers, indifferent and continuous. The Hudson moved south. The sun climbed. The skyline held. She drank the coffee and looked at the morning and let herself be somewhere without calculating how long she was allowed to stay.